In the early days of World War II, German Luftwaffe pilots dominated the skies of Europe. Their sleek Messerschmitt Bf-109s and deadly Focke-Wulf 190s had carved a reputation as some of the most feared fighters in the world. When news spread of America's new heavy fighter, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, German pilots laughed. They mocked its size, its bulk, its awkward design. To them, it looked less like a fighter and more like a flying milk jug. In fact, the nickname stuck, the jug, but laughter has a short life in war. Because while the Thunderbolt looked clumsy, it carried something unmatched in the air war: 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 8 barrels of pure destruction, capable of unleashing a storm of lead that no German pilot could ignore. To understand the rise of the Thunderbolt, we need to step back to the late 1930s. America was not yet in the war. The U.S. Army Air Corps needed a new fighter, something faster, tougher, and more advanced than anything in its arsenal. The answer came from Republic Aviation, under the guidance of a brilliant designer named Alexander Kartveli. Kartveli believed in building fighters that could not only fight but also survive. Unlike the lightweight, nimble designs favored in Europe, he envisioned something different: a war machine that could take punishment, dish it back, and still bring its pilot home. When the first P-47 prototypes rolled out, they were enormous compared to other fighters. With a wingspan of 40 feet and an empty weight of nearly 10,000 pounds, it dwarfed the German Bf-109, which weighed barely half as much. Luftwaffe intelligence officers, upon seeing photos of the Thunderbolt, scoffed. "This is America's idea of a fighter?" they sneered. "It will never stand a chance against our sleek machines." German pilots imagined it would be easy prey. Heavy meant slow, and slow meant dead. In their eyes, the P-47 was already a failure, but appearances were deceiving. The Thunderbolt's bulk hid an engine unlike anything the Luftwaffe faced: the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial. A massive 18-cylinder beast, capable of delivering more than 2,000 horsepower, it gave the P-47 unmatched high-altitude performance. While German fighters struggled to breathe above 25,000 feet, the P-47 roared with life, climbing alongside the bombers it was designed to protect. And then there were the guns. Most fighters carried 2, maybe 4 machine guns. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 usually had a pair of 7.92mm MGs and a single 20mm cannon. Deadly, yes, but nothing compared to the jug. The P-47 carried 8 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns, each capable of spitting 750 rounds per minute. Together, they unleashed nearly 100 rounds per second, a torrent of firepower capable of tearing a bomber apart, shredding a fighter, or ripping through the armor of a panzer tank. Yet, despite its raw power, the P-47's early days were far from glorious. Pilots complained it was sluggish at low altitude. Compared to the Spitfire or Mustang, it didn't turn as tightly. At first, American pilots found themselves struggling to adapt to the jug's heavy handling. The Luftwaffe mocked them even more. Reports came back of German pilots calling the Thunderbolt clumsy, a pig in the air, and too fat to fight. And for a time, it seemed they might be right. But war is the ultimate test. The U.S. 8th Air Force needed a fighter to escort its bombers deep into German territory. The B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators were suffering horrific losses, torn apart by flak and the guns of German interceptors. A fighter was needed that could climb high, stay with the bombers, and stand up to the Luftwaffe's best. Its pilots quickly learned that the jug wasn't built for slow-turning dogfights. It was built for speed, altitude, and raw power. In a dive, nothing could touch it. German Bf-109s and FW-190s might outturn it, but when the jug pointed its nose down, it became a sledgehammer falling from the sky. No German pilot could follow without risking his wings tearing off. And when a Thunderbolt lined up its 8 guns, the sky lit up with streams of 50-caliber fire. So many tracers that German pilots said it felt like flying into a wall of fire. In spring 1943, P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group entered combat over Europe. At first, the results were modest. But as American pilots learned the strengths of their new machine, the tide began to turn. One German pilot, after surviving a burst from a Thunderbolt, recalled, "It was as if the sky itself had split open. Tracers everywhere, engines shattering, wings tearing. I had never seen such firepower from a single fighter." The laughter began to fade. By late 1943, the P-47 had proven itself. It climbed higher, flew faster, and dove harder than German pilots expected. And those 8 Brownings, once dismissed as overkill, became a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. The Jug had arrived. No longer a laughingstock, it was carving its name into history. But this was only the beginning, because soon the P-47 would descend from the skies not just as a bomber escort, but as a ground attack monster. And when it turned its guns downward, the German war machine would feel the thunder. By the summer of 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces were locked in a brutal struggle over the skies of Europe. The daylight bombing campaign, aimed at crippling German industry, was bleeding American crews at a staggering rate. Waves of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators flew into the heart of the Reich, but the Luftwaffe was waiting with swarms of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Losses mounted. A single raid could see dozens of bombers fail to return. To the crews who flew those missions, it felt like suicide. What they needed was a guardian, something that could fight back against the Luftwaffe's hunters. When the Jug first arrived in England with the 56th Fighter Group, bomber crews weren't sure what to think. The plane looked enormous compared to the sleek Spitfires and Mustangs, but soon they saw its true purpose. The Thunderbolt could climb to 30,000 feet and beyond, where German interceptors hunted the bombers. Its turbo-supercharged engine thrived in the thin air, giving American pilots an edge in altitude where the Luftwaffe once reigned supreme. At first, P-47s lacked the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. They could protect them part of the way, then had to turn back. But even this partial coverage made a difference. When the Jugs were overhead, bomber crews breathed easier. On April 15, 1943, Thunderbolts of the 56th scored their first aerial victories, shooting down WWIIs over Europe. It was the beginning of a transformation. The Germans who once mocked the Jug were now seeing comrades fall to its guns. The Luftwaffe quickly realized something dangerous about the P-47. It was nearly impossible to kill. German pilots complained that even when they raked a Jug with cannon shells, it kept flying. Stories spread of Thunderbolts returning home with wings shredded, engines leaking, even entire sections blown apart, yet still landing safely. One American pilot joked, "The P-47 doesn't leak oil when it's hit. It just sweats a little." To bomber crews, this toughness meant trust. The Jug wasn't just a fighter, it was a shield. But toughness alone wasn't enough. The Thunderbolt's 850 caliber machine guns gave it a killing edge. In head-on attacks, a single burst could rip a German fighter apart. Pilots described the sight of tracers pouring out in 2 blazing rivers of fire, filling the sky. Luftwaffe pilots soon learned to fear those guns. One German survivor described engaging a formation of Thunderbolts. It was like flying into a storm of steel. "We were hunters once. Now, against the Thunderbolt, we were prey." The P-47 wasn't as nimble as a Spitfire or a Bf-109 in a turning fight, and American pilots knew it, so they adapted. Instead of turning duels, Jug pilots used energy tactics, climbing high, diving fast, striking hard, and zooming away before the enemy could react. In a dive, the Thunderbolt was unmatched. With its heavy frame and powerful engine, it could reach speeds over 500 miles per hour. German pilots who tried to follow risked structural failure. Their wings simply couldn't handle the stress. The Jug became known for the boom and zoom style of combat, strike like lightning, then vanish into the clouds, and when it fired those 8 Brownings, the results were devastating. Luftwaffe fighters shredded in mid-air, fuel tanks ignited, wings snapped apart. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe's laughter had faded into grim respect. German intelligence began warning pilots not to underestimate the Thunderbolt. Its firepower was overwhelming, its toughness legendary, and its pilots increasingly skilled. Meanwhile, American ace groups like the 56 Fighter Group, the famous Zemke's Wolf Pack, were rewriting the rules of aerial combat. Men like Francis Gabby Gabreski and Robert Johnson racked up kills, proving the Jug could stand toe-to-toe with Germany's best. Johnson himself survived one of the most famous encounters of the war. His Thunderbolt was ambushed. Riddled with over 200 bullets, oil splattered across his canopy. A German ace circled him, emptying his guns at point-blank range. Yet the Jug refused to die. Johnson managed to fly back and land safely, his aircraft a flying wreck but still intact. That story spread like wildfire. To the Americans, it was proof of the Jug's indestructibility. To the Germans, it was terrifying. But the Jug's story didn't stop in the skies. As the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, the Thunderbolt found a new role, one that would turn it into a nightmare for German soldiers on the ground. With bombs under its wings, rockets in its racks, and 8 Brownings still at the ready, the Jug would soon become the scourge of tanks, trains, and convoys. For now, though, over the skies of occupied Europe, German pilots who had once mocked the P-47 began to whisper a new truth. The Jug was no joke. The stage was set for its greatest test yet, the invasion of Normandy. When the Allies stormed the beaches on D-Day, the Thunderbolt would descend in thunder and flame, and German troops, already wary of the Jug in the skies, would come to fear the roar of its engine above their heads. June 6, 1944, D-Day. At dawn, thousands of Allied ships filled the English Channel, carrying men and machines toward the beaches of Normandy. It was the largest invasion in history, and its success depended not only on soldiers storming ashore, but on the skies above being controlled by the Allies. The Luftwaffe had once ruled Europe's airspace, but by the summer of 1944, the balance had shifted. The reason? Allied fighters, Spitfires, Mustangs, and most brutally, the P-47 Thunderbolt. That morning, as German defenders braced for the Allied landings, the roar of the Jug echoed overhead. The Thunderbolt had already proven itself in the escort role, but on D-Day, it was unleashed as a ground attack beast. Its massive frame, once mocked for being too heavy, became an advantage. It could carry bombs, rockets, and still have room for its 8 Brownings. Each P-47 could be loaded with 2 500-pound bombs under its wings, plus 10 powerful 5-inch rockets. Combined with its machine guns, this meant a single Jug could deliver the same punch as a light bomber, except it could do it faster, lower, and more accurately. For German soldiers on the ground, the sight of the Thunderbolt diving from the clouds was terrifying. Tanks, trucks, trains, nothing was safe. The Jug would swoop in, unleash its fire, and climb away before flak gunners could respond. One German officer later wrote, "The Thunderbolt was not a fighter. It was a flying executioner. We feared its sound more than artillery." In the early hours of June 6th, Thunderbolts struck bridges, rail lines, and convoys behind German lines. Their mission was to choke off reinforcements, preventing the Wehrmacht from rushing divisions to the beaches. The effect was devastating. German units attempting to move east found roads cratered, bridges destroyed, and every movement targeted by Allied fighter bombers. By noon, as American and British troops fought for survival on the beaches, Jugs were roaring overhead in endless waves. They strafed gun positions, bombed strongholds, and silenced artillery that threatened to break the invasion apart. German soldiers quickly developed a saying, "Where there is thunder, there is death." Unlike bombers that flew high and distant, the Jug attacked low, close, and personal. Its 850s ripped apart columns of infantry, shredded armored cars, and even pierced the thinner armor of panzers. When bombs or rockets were added, entire armored units could be wiped out in a single pass. A panzer commander recalled watching an armored column being annihilated. They came down in a scream, spitting fire. Tanks burst into flame, trucks exploded, men scattered like insects. We had no answer. The P-47's toughness, so critical in dogfights, proved just as valuable over Normandy. Flak guns peppered the skies with shells, but the Jug could take hits and keep going. Pilots often returned with holes the size of fists through their wings, or tail sections shredded, but the plane still flew. This durability allowed pilots to press attacks harder, fly lower and risk more, because they trusted their aircraft to bring them back. For the men who flew it, the Thunderbolt became a symbol of confidence. They called it their iron friend. One pilot said, "When I strapped into the Jug, I felt invincible. No matter what the Germans threw at me, I believed I would come home." That belief mattered. Morale was fuel, and the Jug gave it in abundance. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe was collapsing. Fuel shortages, pilot losses, and constant pressure left them unable to challenge Allied air supremacy. On D-Day, German fighters barely appeared. Those who did often found themselves outnumbered, diving into formations of Mustangs and Thunderbolts, only to be cut down. The Jug's presence on D-Day symbolized the shift in power. Once mocked, It was now one of the most feared machines in Europe. As the Allies pushed inland, the Thunderbolt became the spearhead of air support. In the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, P-47s turned German retreat into massacre. Tanks, vehicles, artillery, all destroyed from above. The roads were littered with smoking wreckage, so much that survivors called it the Corridor of Death. The Jug wasn't just a fighter anymore, it was a hammer smashing the German war machine. The Germans had laughed once. They had sneered at the idea of a fat, heavy fighter. But in the summer of 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt was laughing last, its 8 Brownings spitting thunder, its bombs shattering tanks, its rockets piercing armor. From the skies above Normandy to the battlefields beyond, the Jug had become more than a warplane. It was a legend, and yet its story wasn't finished. For beyond Europe, across the vast Pacific, another enemy waited, the Japanese Zero. And there, the Jug would prove once again that laughter was no match for thunder. By late 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had carved its reputation into the skies of Europe. Luftwaffe pilots no longer mocked it. They feared it. German tanks burned in its wake, convoys lay shattered, and the once mighty air force of the Reich struggled to survive under its relentless firepower. But the war was global, and the Jug's thunder was needed elsewhere. Thousands of miles away, across the endless blue of the Pacific, another battle raged. There, the enemy was not the Bf-109 or the FW-190, but the nimble Japanese Zero. The Zero was famous for its agility. In the early days of the war, it had humiliated Allied pilots, outturning and outclimbing nearly everything it faced. Many wondered, could the P-47, big and heavy, stand a chance in such a theater? The answer came swiftly. When the Jug arrived in the Pacific, its durability and firepower proved just as decisive as in Europe. While the Zero could twist and turn, it could not outrun or outdive the Thunderbolt, and when caught in the stream of those 8 Brownings, it disintegrated. An American pilot later described it bluntly. A Zero against a Jug wasn't a fair fight. If you let him get close, he could dance around you. But if you kept your speed and fired first, he never walked away. The P-47 took part in the island-hopping campaigns, pounding Japanese airfields, strafing shipping, and smashing fortified positions. Its ruggedness was invaluable in the harsh, humid climate of the Pacific, where maintenance was a constant struggle. On the ground, Marines and soldiers cheered the sound of the Jug overhead. When Japanese bunkers resisted artillery, Thunderbolts swooped in with bombs and rockets. When jungle ambushes threatened, the Jug's strafing runs tore the cover apart. Just as in Europe, it became a symbol of survival and destruction, a guardian angel for the Allies, a nightmare for the Axis. By this stage of the war, the sleek P-51 Mustang had entered the spotlight. With its longer range, it escorted bombers deep into Germany, earning fame as the Knight of the Skies. Some thought this meant the Jug was overshadowed, but pilots knew better. The Mustang may have stolen the headlines, but the P-47 was the workhorse. It flew more sorties, dropped more bombs, and delivered more ground attack missions than any other Allied fighter. Where toughness and firepower were needed, the Jug remained unmatched. Stories of the P-47's durability became legend. Pilots returned with missing cylinders, shredded wings, and bullet-riddled fuselages. One came home with half a tail. Another landed after being hit so hard that half his cockpit was blown open to the wind. Still, the Jug brought them back. This toughness inspired confidence not just in the men who flew it, but in the armies it supported. When troops saw the Thunderbolt above, they knew they weren't alone. And what of the Germans who had once laughed? Their tune had changed entirely. Luftwaffe reports late in the war described the P-47 as a monster, nearly invulnerable, and armed like a gunship. German tank crews hated it most of all. The 850s shredded their infantry cover, while bombs and rockets turned their panzers into flaming wrecks. Many remembered the Jug as the single most dangerous fighter they faced. Not the fastest, not the prettiest, but the deadliest. By 1945, the Jug had flown more than 500,000 sorties. It destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft in the air, and tens of thousands of vehicles, trains, and tanks on the ground. It was the very definition of a multi-role fighter, long before the term became popular. When victory came, the P-47 stood as one of the great warbirds of history. It had begun as a laughingstock, mocked for its bulk and weight. but in the fires of combat, it proved that strength, toughness, and overwhelming firepower could win wars. Even after the war, pilots remembered the Jug with fierce loyalty. Many said they would rather fly it than any other fighter. It wasn't the most glamorous, but it was the one that saved lives. Francis Gabby Gabreski, America's top ace in Europe, said it best. The P-47 was the perfect airplane. It could fight, it could bomb, it could dive, and it could bring you home when nothing else would. The Germans had laughed once. They had mocked its size, its shape, its heavy frame. But when its 850s spoke thunder, laughter turned to silence. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was more than just a fighter. It was a force of nature, a flying fortress in its own right. And in the end, it proved that in war, it doesn't matter how you look. What matters is how you fight, and the Jug fought with thunder.